JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, the host of Talking Books Show on Web Talk Radio. And today I welcome back Helmut Portman from the state of Louisiana in the United States. And he's here to talk about his second book in the Alex Beck thriller series, Phantom of the Gulf. His first book, which I interviewed him on a few weeks ago, was Adios El Jefe, now retitled Adios El Jefe Castro. But the first thing I must mention is that you need to read the books in sequence to understand this second book. And there are more books coming down the line, so you need to read them in sequence, otherwise they don't make sense. The characters won't make sense to you, the storylines won't make sense to you, so you need to read in sequence. And if you want to know more about Helmut Portman, then you can go to his webpage, www.helmutportman.com, and there you'll see more about his books and himself, and you can get them from there. And you'll also see that information on the written introduction which accompanies this podcast interview. So, let's get Helmut back on the show again so he can talk about his second book in the Alex Beck thriller series. And for me, this book is more gripping than the first. That's just my opinion. It's not because we're just doing the interview on the second book. That is just my opinion. So let's invite Helmut back. He might disagree with me here, so that he can fill us in as to what his latest book is all about, The Phantom of the Gulf. Helmut, come and join me.
Well, hello, John. It's a pleasure to be back with you. The second book was born out of a military war game that I attended when I was working in the government for the Navy, about threats to the Gulf of Mexico, threats that other countries could pose to the undersea equipment and assets that the United States has on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And they're extensive. And so the book is about one of our enemies basically attempting to hold at threat some of our key assets in the Gulf of Mexico. The hero of the story, Alex Beck, is based largely on my experiences in various jobs I've held in the government. It was a number one, and as John mentioned, that they do flow in sequence, and it's more enjoyable if you read them in sequence, and they make more sense. And the second book is really about one of these countries working through Cuba to infiltrate the Gulf of Mexico and threaten some of the assets that the United States has underwater in the Gulf of Mexico. And let me point out that this was years and years before Deepwater Horizon happened in the Gulf of Mexico. And basically, the subject of the book might be an attempt at a man-made Deepwater Horizon.
And could you just remind the audience, yourself, a little bit of a history about yourself and how really the story behind these series came about. So who are you?
Okay. I was born in Switzerland. I moved, my family immigrated to the U.S. when I was 8 years old to Atlanta, Georgia. I'm heavily camouflaged, but I can speak, read and write German. But I went to Georgia Tech for my undergraduate. I went to work in the oil fields for Schlumberger Offshore Services in the late 1970s and logged oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico, which actually feature in this book, in fact, in first chapter. But after that job, I was recruited by the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory up in Maryland, the Defense Laboratory. They wanted me to be a supervisor in their West German field office to work on a nuclear missile system that the Army had over there. And that's the basis of my first book. After I did that for several years, I came back to the U.S., went to work in the submarine security world at Johns Hopkins, which is the basis for this book. So this book is a combination of oil field experiences and submarine warfare experiences. I worked submarines for years. I learned how to hunt Soviet submarines and acoustic data that we obtained with our attack submarines. I ended up running a program to protect our own submarines from being detected. After that, I went to work at a Navy laboratory in Panama City, Florida, where I helped develop their unmanned systems programs. These are the underwater robots on the surface and underwater robots that the Navy uses. And then finally, I ended up with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Mississippi, of all places, at Stennis Space Center, running the National Data Buoy Center, which puts buoys out all over the world. And basically, my journey has been one following my family to get our young son to Louisiana to near his grandparents.
So you can see, everybody, that these books, they're pretty much based on Helmut's own experiences. So he's drawing on his own professional career a little bit. So when you read the book, yes, you might thinking, did these events actually happen? Because he makes them very real with all the names that he drops in here, especially when he goes to the Kremlin, Brezhnev and Andropov. We all knew about them. And where the meetings take place. So is the book real, or is it fantasy, or is it a thriller? What is it? You need to read it to find out and make your own mind up. I'm saying nothing. But what I am going to do now is crack on and get this book open so that Helmut can tell us a little bit more about it. So we have 58 chapters here. And if you think we're going into all 58, no, we're not. We're going to tap into a few of the chapters, everybody, enough to give you a flavour, an insight, whet your appetite, a bit of a taster, a teaser as to what this book is about. So we've chosen a few chapters. And so with that in mind, Helmut, let's head off to the first two chapters, which are headed up March the 7th, 1977, 1300 hours Eastern Time, Gulf of Mexico, and June the 10th, 1979, 1300 hours Eastern Time, CIA Headquarters, Langley, Virginia. In the first chapter, you describe some details, the highly complex and extremely dangerous workings of the oil rig industry. Here, we've got the oil rig Mr. Mel drilling rig. We've got the position of the USS Philadelphia, an SSN 690, if I've got my research right, a submarine in the Gulf with its TB-29 towed sonar array system. Of course, she's a 688 class nuclear attack submarine positioned there to protect the oil rigs and the platforms, because it's quite an exposed area and it's open to all sorts of threats from terrorists, foes, who knows. So, and in chapter 2, you remind us of the relationship between Alex and Anna. Now, Alex and Anna from the first book, oh, do they have a relationship? And it doesn't follow suit. But you need to read that book before you understand what this is about, everyone. And and of course, all the other characters from there, Ludo and Angel and the other characters there from the first book, embroiled in the assassination attempt of Fidel Castro. So you really do need, as it says, crack on, first book first, then read this one. But Helmut, where are you taking the reader here on this journey of this thriller series of yours with these first two opening chapters?
Basically, it's a introduction of a mystery threat that the Navy finds in the Gulf of Mexico that they don't understand. They don't know what it is. They know there's a submerged contact but they cannot track it. Their submarines and their warships down there have no idea what it is. And Alex Beck, the hero of the story, by now working for the CIA, is engaged to help figure out what it is. I start in chapter 1 by laying out some of the details of what it's like working in the oil fields in the Gulf of Mexico that drive the book. Namely, there are air guns that crews in the Gulf of Mexico fire off the oil rigs to send sound signals into the water, into the bottom, actually, into the sediment, that can be detected in oil wells to figure out where the oil and gas is. But there's a side to this, namely, these same sound signals bounce off anything underwater that you may not be able to hear otherwise. And so a nuclear attack submarine picks up on this and finds that there's something out there in the water, but they can't figure out what it is. And they think it might be like a diesel submarine, but the problem is it never comes up the surface to charge its batteries, so they cannot figure out how in the world this could be happening. And at the same time, the Navy informs the CIA. They always keep closely coupled on these kinds of threats. So the CIA gets involved. And as we get into chapter 2, can we discuss 1 and 2 at the same time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, chapter 2 introduces a new character. So John mentioned that Alex and Anna, the beautiful Cuban girl with the long black hair, who also is a murderer, by the way, if you read book 1.
Oh, she is. She is, everyone.
Yeah,
She's cold.
But he still loves her. You know, he can't let go of that. But it turns out in chapter 2, Alex meets an analyst at the CIA named Catherine, who is equally as stunningly beautiful, blonde-haired, willowy, but now this complicates the romantic scene in the book. So now the complication is building between Alex and Catherine and Anna. And that kind of sets the stage for the book.
3 in the bed, everyone. Doesn't work out. And he's still got the Porsche in this book.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want to know the story of the Porsche, well, guess what? Read the first book. Right, let's go, Helmut, to chapters 8 and 9. The storylines here. You know, the attentiveness. September the 20th, 1979, 0900 hours Eastern Time. We've got Camp Peary near Williamsburg, Virginia, and November the 3rd, 1979, 1800 hours Eastern Time, Baltimore, Maryland. Of course, chapter 8 revolves around the character Eve. Re her training at the farm. Clearly, she is streets ahead of all the other students that are there. So here's another powerful, powerful character coming into the storyline. And she's not to be messed with, everybody. Believe you me. And we've got some of the instructors at the training course there whose egos are dented when she upends them, literally. And her training is accelerated, you know, the Navy SEAL training. And it's fascinating. They are intrigued at the training center as to understand where did she learn her physical, you know, to physically protect herself. Where did she get her training from? Where she's got all this already? Who's behind her? And in chapter 9, Alex and Catherine meeting up in a bar to celebrate his 26th birthday. And with Catherine filling in on Ava. The meal at Tio Pepe goes well, but Alex has got some ideas, and I think Catherine's got other ideas. Whether those ideas merge, well, who knows? I'm not going to tell you because Helmut's going to tell you. What's cracking off here? What's happening in these 2 chapters?
Basically, in chapter 8, we see Eva. By the way, Eva is Anna. the CIA took Anna and her co-conspirators from the first book, who murdered people, basically took them to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, arrested them, tried them, put them in prison for life, but basically gave them new identities and new names. So Anna is now Eva. And unfortunately, she's had to cut her long hair short, but she's still beautiful. But she basically has spent her year in purgatory and is now at the farm. The farm is basically a little-known secret of the CIA. That's their training center near Williamsburg, Virginia, in the U.S. That's where they take their agents and teach them all their clandestine operations and martial arts and all that kind of stuff. So Eva is there, and within the first week, she has a Navy SEAL instructor who decides to make an example of her. He attempts to brutalize her to the class to impress them all, and things happen differently than he expected. And the leadership at the farm realizes how special she is. She basically is more talented than most of their SEAL instructors. Knows how to handle weapons, has a black belt in karate, and so basically it starts developing just how special she is, and the CIA starts recognizing that. So basically, this happens. The CIA realizes just how special Catherine is and how they're going to move her along quicker through the agency, where she will reunite with Alex eventually. But now things get complicated because Alex, having met the beautiful Catherine at CIA, they are now in Baltimore celebrating his birthday, as John mentioned. And Alex is kind of innocent. Alex has not had a lot of romantic engagements in his life. He has had engagements with Eva or Anna, but that was really, he had not a lot beyond that. Now, it turns out Catherine has other ideas. As they go up there and meet at the Tio Pepe restaurant to celebrate his birthday, Catherine pretty much maneuvers it to where they end up in a hotel in Baltimore, and let's just say their relationship complexity grows.
Oh, it grows all right, everybody. I'm saying nothing. Poor Alex.
Yeah, the poor guy. He now has two women that are both beautiful, that he both adores, and he is totally their victim. They are the power part of it's becoming a triangle, but he's at the disadvantage.
Two women doesn't work.
Yeah,
doesn't work. So I think you can see that part of the book is quite interesting, but I now want to go a little bit further into the book, everybody. So Helmut, chapter 13, January the 5th, 1980, 0900 Eastern Time, Havana, Cuba. Now, I normally lead the questions so as that the audience gets a flavour of what's in these chapters. And then I normally ask you, the author, to expand more. Well, I'm not going to do it this time. I'm going to let you, Helmut, tell the audience what chapter 13 is about. But all I want to know is how significant is this part of the book in relation to what's coming down the line? So what's in this chapter and is important to the forthcoming chapters? Yes,
and it is, John. There is a person named Juan who was a childhood friend of the lead conspirator of Anna's original team of assassins that were trying to kill Fidel Castro. Juan was in Cuba, and he still is in Cuba, and he was part of the conspiracy, but he was never disclosed to the Castro regime. So he's been in hiding. But turns out he also has gained a job in a security apparatus there. So he was actually on board Castro's security team when the conspirators tried to assassinate Castro. But he was never outed. He was never discovered. But it turns out Juan ends up, ironically, being selected for a key security job at a monstrous shipyard facility that Castro has been building in Cuba, in Havana, and Juan's terror in life, the thing that he fears most, is that if anyone ever connects him to the male conspirator of the original team that Ana was part of, a guy named Ludo back then. His name is Carlos now, but Juan lives in fear that he'd never be discovered as being connected to this Carlos guy, who is in the U.S. Okay, but it turns out that Juan starts his new job as a security supervisor at this super secret shipyard that Castro is building, and he basically finds out about some of the vehicles that are going to be a key part of the plot in the story. One of the key vehicles that I can talk to, without giving too much away, is a super yacht that is named Ayesha in the book, owned by a arms merchant, a Saudi arms merchant. It turns out that the super yacht Ayesha is based on a real-world yacht that was owned by Adnan Khashoggi, a real arms merchant, and was actually owned by Donald Trump previously. So the yacht is real, okay? The way it's used in the book is not real, okay? And I'll leave it at that. But basically, Juan gets into the facility and learns what's really going on there, which is at the heart of the plot of the book. And I really don't want to go too much into that and give too much away.
Okay, so I think we got a little taste of what's in that chapter. So let's quickly slip along to the scenes in chapters 21 and 22, aptly titled April the 1st, 1980, 1300 hours UDT, not Eastern Time. Moscow, the Soviet Union, and June the 15th, 1980, 0800 hours Eastern Time, Havana, Cuba. Moscow. Hey, now this is getting interesting. I have to say the conversation between the two top Russian officials, one conversation between two top the Russian officials is a face-to-face contact with Leonid Brezhnev, the top man in Russia then. In a Moscow steam room is highly intriguing. In chapter 22, we've got the flotilla of ships bringing in hundreds of thousands of immigrants to the US, something the Carter administration failed to grapple with, and was causing a problem for the SS Philadelphia submarine to do its surveillance duties. Something the Russians picked up on and took full advantage, everybody. And to use the X-craft. With Ayesha's involvement. Here's the yacht. This is very, very powerful chapters. So would you care to fill us in as to what the storylines are here? The Kremlin and the people who you've got talking to there is very, very intriguing.
Sure. In chapter 21, we're taken to Moscow, to a banya called Sanduni. A banya is basically a large steam room or a bath, like a Roman bath. And we're listening to two of the top leaders in the Kremlin, Leo Kuznetsov and Alexander Vaziev. They're two of the power brokers that have the ear of Leonid Brezhnev, the secretary of the party. And basically, they are discussing the plot that they are trying to work via the Cubans in the Gulf of Mexico. They are anxious to move the plot along. They're not happy with how slowly it is moving in the Gulf of Mexico. And the reason is that Brezhnev and they are terrified of Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States. They view Reagan as a serious threat. They know he doesn't mince words or mess around, and they are worried. This is also part of the story out of book number 1. They are worried about how can they get Reagan to be less focused on Europe, which is very important to them, and more focused in his own backyard, the Gulf of Mexico, which is what really is motivating them to do whatever they're doing down there with Cuba and the Gulf of Mexico. And so they're in the banya, in the steam room, nursing their hangovers as they basically talk about moving this project to a more active phase. Part of this involves their targets in the Gulf of Mexico. Their first target in the Gulf of Mexico that they had the Cubans focus on was called the Cognac platform. That was it was the deepest oil rig platform at the time, constructed in the Gulf of Mexico. The thing was in over 600 feet of water, very deep. And they knew that platform would be bringing in oil from a number of other platforms and oil fields all around the area. Basically, a significant amount of oil moving up into the United States. So their initial target had been, could they threaten this platform somehow to get Reagan to worry more about that than about Europe? However, they have since decided to focus more on a platform called Loop. Louisiana Oil, I forgot what the other O is, but offloading platform. It's basically a terminal, and this is real, it's a terminal in Louisiana where the majority of the oil that comes into the Gulf of Mexico flows up into the U.S. In fact, it's a third of the oil that the U.S. ingests comes through the Loop terminal. The Loop terminal is guarded very heavily. And it was about a year or two out from being opened by the time these guys are talking about this, but they're already anticipating its opening, and they want to hold it at threat. They think that might be even more interesting than holding the Cognac platform at threat. And they're hoping that they can figure out a way to do both. So basically, they're talking about how they can build a fire under the Cubans to make this happen faster and threaten both platforms. That's chapter 21. Chapter 22, as John mentioned, the Mariel boat lift in Cuba. As you'll recall, the Carter administration had they were deluged. They were totally swamped. Castro sent hundreds and hundreds of boats with refugees up into the Miami area. And these were not refugees. What he did is he emptied out his prisons. And he basically emptied out his insane asylums and his prisons. And he sent all the undesirables that he wanted out of Cuba up to Florida. And basically, the Cubans take advantage of this confusion because you can imagine there are boats everywhere on the ocean now. So attack submarines like Philadelphia that are trying to keep tabs on what Aisha, the super yacht, is up to, are kind of having difficulty because of the signal-to-noise problem. There's so much confusion up there. So basically, the setting of this chapter is really the one for building the urgency that the Soviets want the Cubans to embrace and enforcing that.
So let's go a little bit further into the book, chapters 25 and 26. The reader stays in Cuba as the headings are June the 14th, 1980, 0800 hours Eastern Time, Havana Club. And September the 13th, 1980, 0800 Eastern Time, Punta Los Corrales Shipyard Complex, Havana. Now, you've already touched on this shipyard, which Castro built. And I hope I've got the pronunciation right there, everybody. I've tried. So if my Spanish isn't up to a standard, then I do apologize. So in chapter 25, we have a very tense meeting between Jimenez Alvarez and the Soviet Union's team based in Havana, re the Aisha Project X craft. And it really is a very intense meeting. You know, And in chapter 26, the operations at the Cuban shipyard around X-Craft, and I said X-Factor then, X-Craft, the 17-metre long sub with 6 crew. It's interesting to see Bulgaria's involvement here in this operation, and the role Timur Iliev and Danny Andropev play, especially as Danny is a white Russian with Bulgarian identity and papers to simply hide his true Soviet identity. For me, Helmut, the story's pace here has dramatically increased and has its own complexities, along with the depth of detail you go into to create a sense of realism is phenomenal. So these 2 chapters are pivotal to the storyline as a whole, as far as I can see. So please divulge to the audience what's going on here. And that the interview is the Russian interview in Cuba. That's to the point, isn't it?
Yes. So from the previous chapters where the Soviet leadership built their sense of urgency, they recalled Svetlana Orlov, who is the highest ranking party operatic in Cuba, to Moscow to convey that to her, and sent her back home to convey it to the Cubans. She goes back to Cuba, and she builds a fire under the Cuban intelligence people. She lets them know under no uncertain terms that, first of all, the Soviet Union cannot have any connection to what they do in the Gulf of Mexico. There has to be absolutely no evidence. And she turns up the heat on increasing the activity, speeding things up. And more importantly, she basically casts suspicion on several of the people that are key players down there that the Soviet Union fears might give them away. And one of them is named Rob Fernandez. He is a CIA operative that has been one of Castro's favorite arms suppliers for years. He's based out of Miami, but spends a lot of time in Havana. And although the Cubans will not touch him because he's Castro's favorite, the Russians hate him. They are concerned. They've been burned by spies in the past, and they don't like him. And he hired 2 people from the original CIA conspirators team that came out of the Verse book, that were also sent to Guantanamo, that were turned into CIA agents in Cuba. He hired them, and so he and those 2 are now under suspicion. And the Soviets basically want them to go away. This puts a lot of pressure on the Cuban intelligence people to make that happen. Now, in chapter 26, Juan Perez, one of the Cuban intelligence people, who is actually, he's not a CIA asset, but he's the one that has the history with Carlos, one of the CIA assets. He basically has his worst fear come true. He walks into this monstrous facility that Castro has built, where the Aisha is and the X-Craft is, and he basically comes face to face with Carlos, who was his boyhood friend in Cuba, and who is the last person on earth he wants to ever see again, because it could threaten his existence down there. It could threaten his safety and security. He basically turns foot, walks away, and this is noticed by his superiors, who are also watching, his intelligence superiors. And so now the suspicion is on him as well. So what is the background behind Juan and Carlos? What's going on here? And so their intelligence boss basically starts having his agents, basically go to their apartments, turn everything over to see what they can find. And they are now all under suspicion.
I told you the plot thickens, and wait till you get to the next chapters we're going to touch upon. So, let's go to chapters 30 and 31. And these chapters are very intense and they're gripping. And probably more so than... See, I think, if I said it, that this book has got more twists and turns, it's got more depth to it, it's got more intensity to it than book 1. And that's perhaps why I like book 2 more than book 1. But that's just my opinion. You formulate your own ideas, everybody, when you read the books in sequence. So in chapters 30 31, we've got the CIA Black Lagoon Laboratory and underneath the Loop Marine Terminal pumping platform. In chapter 30, we have Macaster, Catherine, Ava, and Alex. Uh-oh. Not going to go well here. Have been driven to a secret location in the Maryland's woods. Each one of them had a different reaction when they arrived at the laboratory. A Seahawk P5. This is the American side, but in chapter 31, you flip to the Russians. Very clever. Danny Andreev and Timur Ilyev in a remotely operated vehicle, underwater vehicle, of course, positioned around the Loop Marine Terminal. Now, the Americans suspect something untowards, and at the end of the chapter, we have Ayesha's appearance. Tell us, Helmut, what's cracking off here in this continuing high-stakes, high-drama story of yours?
Sure. So in chapter 30, Richard McMaster, the head CIA person, takes Alex and Ava and Catherine basically to a secret laboratory that is somewhere buried in the woods of Maryland called the Black Lagoon Laboratory. And there he shows them a vehicle, an underwater vehicle that he has been developing for several years in anticipation of the kind of threat that they're facing in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, interestingly enough, he has been doing this not in anticipation of threat for the Gulf of Mexico, but in anticipation of a threat in the Arctic. Okay, his real concern is that at some point in the future, the Soviets and other countries are going to threaten U.S. interests in the Arctic, on the ocean floor of the Arctic. So he has started a program, a secret program, to develop a vehicle, a very unique vehicle that has, you could almost call it an undersea fighter plane, and go very deep. It turns out that the Seahawk P5 is fictional. However, it's based on real vehicles built by a brilliant British engineer named Graham Hawkes. If you Google Graham Hawkes, Hawkes, it wasn't at this time frame, it was later, a decade later, but he actually has developed these vehicles, and they can go to tremendous depths, and they're highly maneuverable. They're like little fighter planes underwater. And to give you an example of who buys these things, Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, bought one or two for his 600-foot yacht as play toys for his rich friends. So that's just kind of a little sideline. But anyway, they encountered the P5, the Seahawk P5, at the Black Lagoon Laboratory, where they learn what the CIA has in store for this vehicle, what they intend to use it for. Then you go to the next chapter, where the X-Craft, which is the Soviet mini submarine that I haven't said much about, and I'm not going to right now, is basically conducting a dress rehearsal under the Loop terminal. They find their way there. The security is very tight around the Loop, but the interesting is there was a lot more security focus on the surface of the water and in the air around the Loop terminal than there was underwater. And this is something that came out of my war game experience. So basically, the X-Craft practices going in under the Loop terminal to the main platform, placing a package about the size of a small refrigerator, and then retrieving it and leaving without being detected. So that's their whole scenario in that chapter.
Very, very interesting. So, I have to say, Helmut, I am struggling to find a chapter in this book of yours that's not a page turner. It's not, fully detailed. It's not gripping. And I found it very hard to, pick out some sample chapters for the audience to listen to, and for you to, do some homework on, and to be able to give the audience, a flavour as to what this book is about, because they're all action-packed. He doesn't give you any respite here, everybody. There's no respite.
That's just something that'll put me in jail.
Might have a difficulty doing an interview for future books if he's in jail, but that's another story. We'll stop there. So, however, chapters 37 and 38 had a bit of an edge to them for me. February the 17th, 1981. Central Time, 0700. The Loop Terminal, Gulf of Mexico. Both short, punchy chapters, 37 and 38. We've got Alvin Theodore squeezing his 6-foot frame into this tiny cockpit of the Seahawk P5 submersible. He thrives on operations like this. This is what he does. He loves it. And I think I'm right. He's an ex-Navy SEAL person. And he's retired, but he's being offered this mission and he's relishing it. So what is this mission? That's the question. And Jeremy Landry and his friend Harvey Goodry's encounter with the Coast Guard off Louisiana. A day's fishing. Poor guys, they thought they'd go fishing, everybody, yes, and I don't think they'll go back fishing, not after that experience. So what's the mission? What are you disclosing here in this part of the book? I feel so sorry for these two guys who are going out for fishing.
Okay, so in 37, Alvin Thibodeau, he is a retired SEAL, and as a SEAL, he's used to driving around in the little mini submarines that the SEALs operate, which I actually, which were built and supported by the Navy lab I worked for in Panama City. So I know a little bit about them. They're actually low and slow. They don't go very deep, maybe 20 feet. They go a couple of miles per hour. They're kind of boring if you think about it. They were designed to take SEALs from the back of a submarine and basically putt them into shore to go cut somebody's throat and then putt back out. So Alvin is now getting to drive a Seahawk P5, which is like a little fighter plane, and he loves it, okay? He has to fit himself into it, but basically, his first real mission in the thing is to follow the X-craft, which is the Soviet threat, and covertly follow it to under the Loop platform, and to basically spy on what they are doing. And so the X-craft, the Russians, they have no idea that they're being observed. And so they have their floodlights on. They have their little grappling hooks and the little box that they're going to put down in place and all that. And Alvin keeps his lights off as he sits at a distance and just watches them. So he sees what they do. Now we know, now the CIA knows what the game is, what they're going to be doing. They're going to be placing explosives, basically, at the bottom of the Loop and the bottom of Cognac. And he doesn't stop there. He continues to tail them when they leave back to the Asia. And I better not say too many things there. That might give too much away. But he basically tails them back. I'll leave it at that. I'll go to 38. And so 38 is another Loop story. It turns out there are two Cajuns, two good old Cajuns from Louisiana, and their motorboat, their fishing boat. And they have this brilliant idea. So the Loop terminal, and this is true for all buoys in the ocean, they're fish attractors. If you want to catch good fish, you go to a buoy. So they figure, what better buoy to go to than one of the Loop buoys? And so they decide to drive out there. And as they're fishing away, getting ready to fish, a 110-foot Coast Guard cutter with a 50 caliber machine gun at the front shows up around the corner and basically chases them away in a not too nice way. Now, that part is based on an experience that my father-in-law told me, my late father-in-law, when he took a sailboat and sailed near the Loop, and he found out that, yes, there really is a 110-foot Coast Guard cutter with a machine gun. And yes, they do take unkindly to you going into the area. So it just kind of shows you reinforces the level of security that the U.S. had around the Loop terminal, at least on the surface.
I just felt so sorry for the two guys, going out fishing, yes, and I've been basically hauled away, not very nicely, and I do apologise for my pronunciations here. And next time if I interview Helmut, I'm going to say, can you make the pronunciations better for me, please? No Russians, no Caucasians, plain simple. But there you go. So let's head off, Helmut, to the final area of the book that I would like to expose, and that is chapters 48 and 49. As I said, there are 58 chapters, and I'm not going to the end because these two chapters are setting you up for the final chase to the finishing line. Here we are, we're August the 1st, 1981, 2200 hours UDT, so that means we're in Russia, everyone. The Kremlin, yet again. And then August the 2nd, 1981, 1700 Eastern Time, Gulf of Mexico. Oh, goody, we're back in the Kremlin. The opening paragraph is, Les Kushnev, the KGB Direct Action Bureau Chief, and his best friend, Alexander Yeshevich, a Deputy Secretary of the Politburo and confidant of General Secretary Brezhnev. Brezhnev's heir, in other words, entered the office of the KGB chairman, Yuri Andropov. And of course, Yuri Andropov and Leonid Brezhnev were very, very high-profile Russian politicians. They were ushered in right away to an expectant Andropov. So this chapter is about the meeting with Andropov, wanting an update on Aisha and the X-Craft project. In particular, looking for guarantees that the Americans can't point the finger at them. Chapter 49 is Alvin's operation in the Seahawk, tracking the X-Craft in the loop. Helmut, you use some well-known powerful names in Russian history here. For we all know, as I says, Brezhnev and Andropov. So, where do you get the contents of these chapters? Where in the inner recesses of your brain do you come up with these stories?
I have a twisted mind. To be honest with you, every time I write a book, they're all based on my own experiences, largely. But I take great care when I do my research to make sure that everything that I put in the books, I can point to online so that I won't have a security clearance issue. But I also do a lot of research on the historic characters. So in this case, Yuri Andropov at the time was the KGB chair. And of course, as you know, he was destined. Brezhnev died a year later, and he was destined to become the premier of the Soviet Union, the secretary. So, but this is basically where they give Andropov the heads up on what's about to happen, and they get the blessing from the highest levels of the Kremlin. And then, as John mentioned in chapter 49, that's where the direct action that they are attempting actually takes place. And of course, I'm not going to tell you how that ends up. You'll have to read the book to find that out.
So are these two chapters really the start to the end of the book?
Yes, they definitely are. Yeah.
And if you want to know what the rest of the chapters are and all the chapters in between, well, guess what I'm going to say? Read the book. Now, Helmut, I know that there are more books coming down the line, but I want you to tell the audience what's coming down the line and when can we expect them?
Sure. The next book will actually be published next month, I think. The name of it, the title is Remora, R-E-M-O-R-A. And Remora, you will recall, is a little fish that tag along on a shark. And that book is about anti-swimmer defense. I got the idea for that one when I was working at the Navy laboratory in Panama City in the early 2000s when the USS Cole was attacked. If you recall, the USS Cole was a destroyer that had a bomb detonated next to her hull in the Middle East and was heavily damaged. After USS Cole was attacked, the Navy went on a blind hunt for what they called non-lethal swimmer defense. They wanted to figure out ways to get divers or swimmers, protect ships from. Well, it turns out that during the Vietnam War, the laboratory where I was working at was actually the laboratory that developed all the Navy's swimmer defense techniques. And they were not non-lethal. They were not very nice. And so I started from there. And actually, the book takes you through some interesting concepts that are actually based on a couple of ideas that I have patents on, that I hold patents on, that I mention at the back of the book. But it's a pretty entertaining yarn. But it takes place in the Middle East, largely trying to figure out how to kill bad guys who are trying to attack ships. The next book after that, I'm already 5 chapters in, is called Svalbard, Target Svalbard. That is sort of book 2 on steroids. That's sort of like the book 2 scenario taken up into the Arctic, where the CIA in book 2 was actually concerned about being worried about. There will be a couple of books after that in the Alex Beck series. One of them is going to be, the one after that is going to be Target Los Angeles Harbor, where I will be looking at, again, these are based on things I worked on in my professional life. I worked on a team after the World Trade Center that took a look at what would happen if terrorists announced they had placed an underwater explosive in Los Angeles Harbor. And it turns out that that harbor would shut down, and after about 2 days, you would have exceeded the cost of the World Trade Center because of the disruption of trade, which would not just affect shipping, but rail lines and truck lines across the country. So that's a pretty interesting one. And I have a couple of interesting ideas there that I came up with. Beyond that, I'll leave it at that. That's probably enough to kind of wet the whistle for.
Oh yeah, so there's more to come, everybody, more to come. Now, where can people get your books from? And more importantly, who would you like to see reading them?
Well, people that enjoy Tom Clancy books or John Grisham books or Michael Crichton books might find these fun to read. I don't pretend to be anywhere near that caliber of author, but they're kind of in that genre, I guess.
And where can people get your books from?
Well, Amazon is the best source. If you go to Amazon and either Google my name, Helmut Portman, or the titles of any of my books, they'll pop up. And you can go to my website, helmutportman.com. That's HelmutPortman.com. 2 N's at the end. It's the best place.
Wow. There you go, everybody. That was Helmut Portman's story on his second book. And if I play my cards right, he might get me to do the third book, but I'm staying stump on that one for the time being. Anyway, Helmut, it's been great to have you back on the show. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, John. Pleasure talking with you.
I'm Jody Crowley. Thanks for listening. Wherever you're in the world, until next time, stay safe.